Welcome to the PowettPlay Podcast, where international cricketer Kieran, Powell and marketing genius Shannon join forces, bringing you captivating conversations with the biggest players in cricket and business. Join us as we dive into the lives of current stars in the cricketing world, the legends before them, and those extraordinary icons whose performances changed the game in both cricket and business. Exploring journeys both on and off the pitch, the boardroom, and everything in between. Get ready for an exhilarating blend of cricket, life, and business insights, with two insatiably passionate, infuriatingly no-holds-barred hosts, who, unfortunately for the rest of us, live and breathe this stuff for a living.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 43 of the PowettPlay Podcast. I'm your host Shannon, and as always I'm joined by my co-host Kieran Powell. How are you, Kai?
I'm good, Jordan. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Well, at the minute as you know, we've been playing up cricket in the north. It's resembling a very much autumn/winter sort of feeling towards it at the minute, but I'm hoping for a bit of better weather this weekend anyway.
Well, I'm not sure if I think it's dead winter type of weather up north compared to what I'm experiencing down south at the moment. So it's extremely interesting, the contrast in temperatures just a few hours apart.
Yeah, that 2-hour train ride, you're down in a different environment. It's crazy. I think it all the time. But I also think that every time I leave Manchester, I think that everywhere else is better. And I either come across the Pennines from Leeds or I come up from the train from London or whatever, and you just seem to get a different weather climate here. It's crazy. It's crazy. On today's episode, I wanted to sort of get your thoughts a little bit in terms of some of the coaching stuff and especially more specifically the split coaches that's sort of now happening in international cricket, and really what's your sort of take on it?
I think it's a multi-layered thing. You look at the split coaching implementation system that's happening across various countries right now.
Yeah.
At the top surface, it's obviously happening because there's too much international cricket being played. You know, obviously boards are trying to cram in as much cricket as possible, trying to extract as much revenue as they can from commercial rights partners, etc. And so it's just not viable to have, like the old days, one coach across formats and that coach still be rested and fresh enough to handle it anymore. I mean, sometimes, for instance, you see nowadays that you've got a one-day international happening during the same time that same country may be playing a test match or a T20 match or something. Yeah. So it's absolutely crazy what's happening on that front. And then it becomes even more difficult for coaches when you add in or when you factor in franchise leagues and who's going to be playing where, what's the availability of who. And you've got to shuffle players between not only Test, ODI and T20 formats, but their franchise commitments as well. And you not being able to build or sustain building a team to develop and play the style of cricket that I guess you would want to play. You look at England under Joe Root's captaincy towards the end, and I think that you'd see that it was sort of a regular talking point from him and from the Test coach at that point in time. I can't remember who was the coach before.
Brendan McCullum. It was Chris Silverwood.
Right.
Yeah.
But it just always seemed as though they were never able to get a full strength team out. And obviously England was sort of building towards that 2019 50 over World Cup, which, I mean, they eventually won. So they would say that it was justified, but one format or other formats suffer because of people trying to prioritize what they see as the main thing next on the international calendar. You look at the West Indies right now, for example. Darren Sammy seems to be building, I guess, a nucleus of players in his limited overs teams. He seems to have a bit more of a free reign as well in terms of who he wants to play, who he has access to playing, and he's very comfortable. You could see that things are starting to turn in the West Indies' favor in terms of results a lot more.
Yeah, definitely.
Players seem to be a lot more comfortable in their roles because they're performing them a lot more regularly.
Yeah.
And then you take a look at the Test team, which just seems to be, everyone seems to be on the brink at the moment. I mean, the bowling side of it on the Test team, I'd say we're probably one seamer away. If I'm going to be completely honest, I think that Jaden and Shamar, obviously Shamar is very inexperienced. I think Jaden is growing leaps and bounds in a short span of time. He's always been someone that has sort of studied the game. I think that, people seem to be thinking that Alzari may not be what they wanted him to be, but I think it's a very easy fix if they can, again, and it all comes down to scheduling. If they can play less cricket, less international fixtures, because it's crammed. And I think we spoke to this in our previous episode where we said that there needs to be a set amount of matches so teams can plan accordingly. Then for each series, players can prepare properly and go into that series prepared to execute based on the format, which would then allow someone like an Alzari to bowl fuller in red ball cricket. You're not going to see someone bowling that full or test match lengths in T20 or one-day cricket. You're gonna get destroyed. Alzari has been the West Indies' most successful white ball bowler, and obviously those lengths are white ball lengths that he's bowling. So I think giving him sort of a rest now, going into the back end of the year with the West Indies having a packed schedule, you'll see, obviously, from my standpoint, I think you'll see very good white ball performances from him. But I think to finish off that Test team, and for Andre Kohli's peace of mind, knowing that his batting order seems to be a jigsaw puzzle at the moment, where it's a lot of potential moving pieces. Everyone very inexperienced, apart from Craig, who's been going through a bad rut for a number of years now, not a number of series.
No.
I think that, it's something that boards have to look at and give themselves, as an organization and the respective coaches that they've hired because of the amount of cricket being played, the best chance to sort of execute those roles.
I think what you mentioned there, which I really picked up on, was this factor you said there about the volume of white ball cricket versus the volume of red ball cricket. And you take the West Indies for an example, you look at what that core group of players they've got playing white ball. They all know the roles, they know where they fit in, they all know, how to get the best scenario to they play that, what to do when they're 30 for 3, what they do when they're 100 for 1 after 10. It works because they're playing all the time. Whereas in that Test team, because of that inexperience and the lack of cricket that they're playing together, they sort of don't have that togetherness and that team spirit just purely on the volume of cricket that they're playing.
Yeah, I think then it comes down to experience and seniority.
Yes.
You look at, for example, India, leading up to, I guess, the last 50 over World Cup and then the last T20 World Cup, India were using very inexperienced teams going around the world. So you'd see more the likes of, I guess, up-and-coming Indian players. You'd sort of only see the Rohits, the Virats, the Jadejas in limited overs cricket anyway, in particular, before major events. So they sort of get like a fine-tune to get back in sync with that format. But they've played so much cricket over the years that, obviously they can afford to do that. Other countries don't have, I guess, A, the depth, B, the luxury of being able to, I guess, provide opportunities to your next in line players whilst your senior players get that rest that's needed. And I think that's something that, again, countries have to take into consideration, because a Virat Kohli with 50 ODI centuries, a Rohit Sharma with 30 plus ODI centuries, can take extended breaks from those formats. They have mastered those formats.
Yeah.
It won't take them much to get back into those modes of cricket. And when you look at those two in particular, I think them two in particular, along with the Australian main three fast bowlers, I think have been handled or rotated or managed the best in international cricket. Because Australian cricket, you know, when you really think of who their bowlers are, it's everyone always says Cummins, Hazelwood, Stark, and then you can fill out any other brackets to go along with them. If it's test matches, it's Nathan Lyon. If it's one days or T20s, it's Adam Zampa. And then they have an all-rounder or two filling the other bowling spot.
Yeah.
But when you look at Hazelwood, Cummins, and Stark's record, it's not as if either any of them have played, let's say, 100 and odd tests, 200 and odd ODIs. They're still very limited in the number of games that they play. So they manage well, put into situations where it's to the benefit of the country in terms of maximum results, playing for major tournaments, playing for major competitions to win, but then rested as and when and only put forward to play certain series or matches of a certain magnitude. So again, that comes down to, I guess, ranking and having the luxury of being able to manage players better. So I think boards need to look at, obviously, not just how much cricket they play, but how they manage their players as well.
Yeah, because it's quite interesting you said that about the Australian quicks then, because reading today about England have selected their white ball squad for the Australia series, and they've left out Root resting, and then obviously Ben Stokes is injured. But then part of the statement that from the selection was that they're still in the plans for the Champions Trophy. Now, there's two things I wanted to ask you. One was obviously in terms of, would you put them two in the same bracket as the Australian quicks? And you mentioned there the Indian Rohit and Virat. And then obviously to follow up on your point that you mentioned, that they won't be able to play any more stuff, I don't think, before the Champions Trophy, because when England go to the West Indies, they'll be in Pakistan as part of the test squad. I think it's a crossover, as you mentioned. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because Ben Stokes is retired from one-day cricket, right?
No,
he's not.
No.
So that's interesting then, because for me, Joe Root, for example, well, both of them to a lesser extent. Ben Stokes in one-day cricket to a lesser extent, but Joe Root has mastered one-day cricket as well. He has 16 one-day centuries. I think he's got the most runs. If not the most runs, I think he's got the most centuries for England in ODI cricket. It's something of that nature, if not the most, close to that.
Yeah.
I think what's happened of late, obviously, with them not playing him in T20 cricket as much and resting him from one-day cricket, is that you found that he has sort of lost the groove of what modern ODI cricket is.
Yeah.
And I think that obviously being mindful of the fact that he won't be able to go to the Caribbean before the Champions Trophy, because I think England will be in New Zealand for a test series as well at that point.
Yes, it's Pakistan and New Zealand. Yeah.
Right. So I think this would have been good for them to sort of give Joe in particular a run out in ODI cricket, especially against Australia, because you want to play against tough opposition to just get yourself back in nick, because he's not going to play ODI cricket again ultimately until the Champions Trophy.
If they go with him, that's it. It might obviously be the other thing where they go down a different direction.
Exactly. I mean, and you look at the squad that they've selected, obviously like names like Johnny Bairstow, etc. are missing from these teams as well. So yourself being an English fan, what are your thoughts on that situation?
It's a little bit inexperienced in terms of obviously what they've gone with. I do like, in this situation, I do like to see this a bit of young blood come into it, but I don't think you can write off the experience that both Johnny Bairstow and Moeen Ali have. I totally agree with you in terms of the Root thing. I would have liked to have seen Root play. So, if you are going to look at managing his workload a little bit, don't have to play all the games. You could sort of work it a little bit from his game, from the game management side of things. But at the end of the day, I think you would like to see Root again. I know that Cummins hasn't come over or isn't coming over because his workload's been managed. Yeah. But ultimately, again, they're playing. They're going to be facing, better players, good players. So I wouldn't mind seeing him play because we spoke before about especially England's poor performance in the World Cup. I'd like to see him go to the Champions Trophy with a little bit of more 50-over cricket behind him, because again, we don't play it over here in England. We only play 40-over cricket, which they don't play because they play it in the 100, etc., etc., etc. So it is, we've got to try and work out a way of them playing some form of 50-over cricket. Ben Stokes is Ben Stokes. He's injured. That's one of those things. But I do think though that, again, we've spoken so many times on this podcast about communication to players. Have England gone about it in the right way with Bairstow and Moeen Ali? I doubt it. I just don't think they would have. I think they would have picked this squad. I seen an article that Luke Wright stated that the frustration of both the lads. I think it was more Bairstow in terms of what he was aimed at. Frustrated and want to get back in. And hopefully, you might see an opportunity for them to go to the Caribbean and play that white ball series there. But I think I wouldn't mind having a comment on it after September, once England have played Australia and we see how these young lads go. But that's just my take on it. So going back to my original question, sorry, go on, what were you going to say then?
No, go ahead.
What, in terms of the split coaches, is it a benefit or not?
Honestly, and obviously I grew up in the era more of one coach across formats.
Yeah.
And again, as I said, that was a lot more feasible because guys were playing less international cricket. The calendar wasn't as packed. I guess they like to say that people are more specialized in the various formats, but does that mean that from the inception of cricket until recently we were going with less specialized international coaches? What are we trying to say?
What are you trying to say? Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that we would have been choosing, I guess, people that are not up to scratch to coach international cricket for various formats. I don't see anything that suggests that it is a benefit or not. You look at India, for example, who have gone back to the sort of one coach strategy. Rahul Dravid was coach across formats. They've just won a T20 World Cup. Gautam Gambhir has now come in, he's coach across formats. And I'm pretty sure at this stage it's going to be sort of a transition phase for him, not just in his coaching career, but I guess players like Virat and Rohit phasing out of international cricket. I think that the Champions Trophy will be sort of their last 50-over engagement for India.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I don't think that they'll be going to the next 50-over World Cup. And so just like they did with the T20 World Cup, I think you'll see them bow out of that format of international cricket then and just focus on Test cricket and T20 franchise stuff, until they decide to retire from Test cricket or T20 franchise stuff. So I don't see any huge benefits in the split coaching to suggest that it is the way to go. It has brought about any particular benefits or changes to the game other than coaches not being able to keep up with a busy demand from international scheduling.
Yeah. Do you think you could get to a point a little bit where it becomes a bit difficult for coaches in general? So say, for instance, well, it is the England white ball coaches is up for grabs. So there's Trescothick's in there at the minute. Flintoff's name's been mentioned, as we spoke before, Sangakkara, etc. That the risk becomes where, say, for instance, it was to go to Flintoff. He then ends up becoming sort of looked at as a specialist white ball coach rather than what we mentioned before, which is just to be a coach. You are a coach, whether it be white ball or red ball. So naturally, because England have got the split coaches, whoever actually comes in to do that next role is automatically just perceived as being a white ball coach.
Could be the case. And then obviously there's so much white ball franchise cricket happening. And let's be honest, white ball cricket is where the money is at. So will it be a situation where the best coaches in the world or the guys with the most knowledge of cricket in the world choose to go into that aspect of the game because it takes away less time from your family? It's more lucrative. What happens to Test cricket then? Funnily enough, as we discussed last week about sort of prioritizing Test cricket, and then we saw things coming out later in the week about a Test Fund. I'm wondering if there's going to be a situation where, guys that are sort of Test specialists, will they create a Test franchise league? So when international Test matches aren't on, you've got the Test specialists playing for Test franchises around the world with the best Test coaches. Is that something to sort of help keep Test match cricket going as well?
It's a very, very good point. Again, it's where the finances will be. If it's going to get backed, if the sponsor's going to get on board, then at the end of the day, you wouldn't rule it from not happening because the finances are there. Would they get the crowds that it works in terms of from a franchise T20 side of things? I don't know. Very interesting point though, because at the end of the day,
I mean, as we said in the last part as well, Test cricket is in particularly controlled by three nations: India, England, Australia. So if you were to do something like that and you played games between those three countries, so let's say you had 6 teams, so two franchises could be playing a match in England, another 2 in India, another 2 in Australia, places that draw genuine crowds for Test matches, and then it's a rotational basis, so franchises are moving around those 3 countries. I think you can draw enough of a crowd. You make it sort of everyone plays everyone once. Top 2 teams go through to a finals. In the absence of, I guess, Test series being on for a particular period of time. I think that would be something interesting because then you're talking about the best Test players in the world as well. And you're getting high quality cricket around the board.
I would watch every single minute of that. And that's...
I'm wondering if I've just talked about the death of Test cricket and what's going to replace it.
Well, that's what I was just going to say then, is that I'd watch that because I'd just be fascinated in terms of seeing that, you're merging, 66 players into a 16 franchise tournament, the best 66 players. It can't not make for great viewing, especially the fact that you've got, wherever it would be. So you look at the conditions around from New Zealand into India, into Australia, into England, the change it would make for great, it would be brilliant. But off the back of that, would that be the death of Test cricket?
Well, it won't be the death of Test cricket because Test cricket will still be going, but it'll be the death
effectively
of individual countries playing Test cricket, because ultimately this would be Kerry Packer World Series on steroids.
Yes.
Imagine having a Kane Williamson, Steve Smith, and Joe Root all in the same team.
Well, you want to be a bowler.
You're the franchise owner of that team. You've happy days.
Yeah. But where does the franchise owners fall into this? If you're looking at the owners of, the teams who, the ones in the IPL and how they're linked with the ones in the CPL and how they're linked, et cetera, et cetera. How does that run alongside that if the owners of these franchises want Virat Kohli to be playing for them in that and that and that, but then also that?
Well, I think obviously it's going to have to be sort of the same system where it's auction-based, etc. But I don't know if it may be a situation where, because if something like that happens, for example, then Test cricket is effectively finished. So you're talking about international T20s and one days along with this. So then you have a greater window. You can play this for, let's say, a stagnated period over the year, because obviously the English summer, the English summer and the Australian, the English summer, the Indian summer and the Australian summer don't necessarily all align.
Yeah. So no, but then with that as well, you've got to think about, in my opinion anyway, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, how would that, you think about how you felt representing the West Indies making your first Test match, and you think about, how that would, although, do it playing it, you've got to think about that patriotic aspect to it as well a little bit, I suppose, of representing.
100%. I think, and as I said, like, this probably would be something that would only happen if the ICC just said, away with Test cricket, we just don't see it as a viable option. Or at the end of a World Test Championship cycle, they say, we're going to pick the best X amount of players, have franchises operate it, and play a 2-team, 3-team, 4-team series.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, what you mentioned last week about this ICC fund and it being, it being distributed accordingly and nice and in the right way in terms of like everyone getting looked after, I think the point that you made last week is spot on and absolutely spot on. And, I don't think it's a fluke that other podcasts and other, publications have discussed that sort of thing, because I think the point you made was, you hit the nail on the head. And for Test cricket to move forward, I think that would be a brilliant way to go. If it was to naturally not work that way, then for us to see Test cricket played, and this would then obviously be a viable option to make it work, because you look at. I think for me, like I said, I just love watching Test cricket. I really, really do. It is, it's brilliant the way the game ebb and flows. It's brilliant, and for us to lose that because of the three key nations competing on a regular basis, we want to see something worked out, which is what you mentioned last week. But if we can't, then if we can somehow work it away so we still get it, then that would be great as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think that might be a viable option, though. Like, if they want to cut the amount of international Test matches being played, then something like this comes into play where, let's say, this is something sort of like that creates a feeder pool for guys to be drafted into the bigger Test franchise system. So, so you have maybe just 5 Test matches a year, and you have respective guys still being able to have that national pride. You play for your country, you play Test cricket, you got that first Test cap, you got a World Test record, whatever the case is. Yeah. But you're able to go into something like this as I don't really see much happening in the way of protecting Test cricket. Obviously, the ICC, or was it the ICC that put out that statement about the Test Fund this week, or someone put it out on Cricket Info anyway?
Yeah, so it was an article that Tim Southey mentioned it about it.
Yeah, and then someone else had. The ICC, I think, are dedicating a fund towards like a Test fund.
I think that's what initiated the actual.
But how that fund works and how the fees are going to be allocated, there's obviously still a lot more details to be, I guess, ironed out and disseminated for public consumption. Sorry. So it's a lot to take in, but I think it's either they do it in that way, or they cancel sort of T20 internationals unless it's a World Cup and you just play franchise T20 cricket and skip the T20 internationals to sort of create some room in the international calendar.
Yeah. We're talking there about different bits working out and stuff like that, and I wanted to sort of get your take on something that I think we're both of us seen, and it's been all over social media in terms of Carlos Brathwaite's sort of reaction to getting out. And as much as obviously we don't condone that sort of behaviour in any way at all, it's not great, but do you think that was a build-up of frustration in terms of there's lots of volume of T20 cricket? We're probably struggling to get people to officiate it, and it's leading to a little bit of frustration in terms of from a player perspective, and it sort of led to a little bit of an outburst like that.
First of all, before you even go into that, Carlos, I hope you're listening or watching. For your sake, I would hope that at some point you sort of put out an apology. What I know of Carlos, obviously he's someone that's obviously very passionate about his cricket, but that's not the image that you want to put across or have portrayed as especially in the latter years of your cricketing career. Whilst these things may be short bursts of frustration, these things tend to follow you for a long time, for the rest of your life. And so for someone that has been a former West Indies captain, someone that has created one of the biggest highlights of modern cricket, and someone that is a role model to the many or the few. If you're a role model to 1 or 1 million, it doesn't matter. You still want to set the best example that you can. So obviously, that type of behavior is not going to be something that I would ever say that I'm going to condone. So I hope that hopefully he can see it within himself to put out an apology, and just let more than anything, let the kids that look up to him that it wasn't sort of the way to go about things. But more specifically to your question, I think what's happening now, because there's so many, I guess, tournaments and leagues and matches being played, that obviously there's a shortage of, I guess, top tier officials to go across these various leagues. It's hard to keep up. Every day there's a new league happening somewhere, and so it seemed to be a situation where maybe it wasn't necessarily the best umpiring decision, and so it led to sort of an outburst like that from Carlos. But I think if everyone is going to have their own league or tournament or whatever the case is in an already saturated market,
I think so.
Then you're going to have situations like this, unfortunately, playing out for public consumption, and it's the last thing we want, because I think in a sport that's already the second biggest sport in the world and still growing, which is the crazy part. We want to put on a good face for the new markets that the game goes into. So I think it's interesting to see how the ICC will handle, I guess, sanctioning for various bodies or entities coming forward with proposals for new leagues in the future, because it won't stop. And how much is enough? How much is too much? It will be sort of the question that we start having soon.
Yeah, it's quite funny, really, in terms of like how we've led on to this conversation. Obviously, not in terms of Carlos's situation, but we've talked about the Test cricket situation where we're looking at, franchising that, but in terms of, you're talking about 6 teams and 11 players per team. So you've got like your quality over quantity. And then the other side of this scale at the minute with this T20 stuff is you basically got the sheer volume of such a saturated market where it was brought in to obviously raise this massive awareness and a different, in terms of cricket, which it has done ultimately. Like it really has, when we're speaking about the Olympics in LA next and the growth of cricket, it's, we're not all being negative about franchise T20 cricket because it's had its massive benefits, undoubtedly. But you just lose that little bit of quality. And that's when sometimes it has that detrimental effect.
I mean, there's this saying in the Caribbean, the cream rises to the top, right? And it's always going to be a matter of whichever league pays the most money.
Yeah,
they'll have the top quality players.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if, for example, a Saudi came in and decided to do what they're doing in football and cricket, then you'll see the top players going to Saudi. And infrastructure-wise, obviously, as we saw with something like GT20, where the scores weren't necessarily the best, or even in the makeshift ground for the World Cup in New York, where the pitches weren't great, you can have some interesting situations come up from things like that. But it's always going to be a matter of which leagues are paying the most money. You're going to find the best players then. So it just depends on, I guess, for example, if a Saudi and a China come into T20 franchise cricket, what will that change the landscape of cricket to look like?
Yep. And I think over the next 2 years, so the 2 years before LA and then post 2 years after LA in the Olympics, I think will be the biggest indication of whether the Saudi / China wealth will come knocking at the door, because that's obviously going to be when the awareness is going to be pretty peak. Although some of the Olympic stuff is questionable as well in terms of some of the sports that they do play, but that's a different conversation for a different side of things.
They did have breakdancing, so
I know. Yeah, I didn't make it into the UK's team this year.
I auditioned, but almost broke my foot. So.
Well, no, I appreciate the conversation, because it has been something I wanted to speak to you about, was obviously this side of split coaching, which is obviously how we started the conversation. And ultimately, it does lead on to how, this real mix between white ball and red ball. And ultimately, with the split, is it a benefit? Is it not? It's, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Sometimes with that, it's probably what works for that nation at that moment in time.
And especially for the smaller nations, it's always going to be what's more fiscally viable for them to sustain their cricketing
definitely
abilities also. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that, there'll be a lot of teams looking at how India go, you mentioned there about with obviously Rahul Dravid and then go to Gambia now, is that going to, teams will be looking at that as well and thinking, is that the right way to go? And then you've obviously got the situation, with the teams where it's working better with a split. So you've just got to figure out what works for you. But, we'll see how it goes. But, excellent to chat with you again tonight.
Good episode again. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll speak to you soon, mate.
Cheers, John.
Thank you for joining us on the PowettPlay Podcast, hosted by Kieran Powell and Jordan Shannon. We hope you enjoyed this immersive dive into the world of cricket and business, exploring the unique experiences and perspectives of players past and present, alongside those invaluable insights into intriguing business themes that transcend beyond the boundaries of sporting heroics. Be sure to set your reminders on your Alexa or Google Home device. Or we won't tell anyone if you still use those paper calendar things from a bygone era. Join us next time for more inspiring dialogue with scintillating minds on the PowettPlay Podcast.